They come from the IPCC, so whatever charts they're using to make their case for global warming, that comes from them. Okay, let's get back to global warming potential. Once again, what I was pointing out is that global warming potential is the key factor in their models, and it assigns a relative importance versus CO2. The one thing that first, to me, didn't pass the stink test is, if I know water vapor is so doggone important, I would assign a global warming potential to it. I challenge everyone in this room to go find a global warming potential for water vapor. It doesn't exist. More importantly, they say that the time that this gas resides as a residence life in an atmosphere is important. Now, does that make sense that if CO2 was in the atmosphere in 1900, that it's relevant to today? Or would the concentration be there? I mean, does a 1 month-old molecule of CO2 absorb any different infrared than a 100-year-old molecule of CO2? No, it's concentration, not lifetime. Okay, but I'll give them, I'll give you this residency life argument. If you're going to claim residency life is important, don't you think the IPCC would have accurate data on the residency life of CO2? I'd make sure that I have that, right? Well, here it just basically points out that it's well known that water vapor is important, and yet they don't assign a global warming gas to it. Okay? This points out that water vapor is not given water vapor estimates for water vapor are not presented because the IPCC has not established a definitive for water vapor. So there's a consensus on this theory without even assigning a global warming potential to water vapor. More importantly, here it is. Here's CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, nitrous oxide, chlorofluorocarbons. They don't have carbon monoxide up there. Okay? But as you can see, 150 years, CO2 remains 1. Okay? The other greenhouse gases, though, methane, you see that they fall. So by using this thing called residency life, they can overweight the impact of CO2. But does it make any sense to even have that in the model? Well, you can see why by doing that, you can overweight the impact of CO2 versus the other ones. Because by claiming that CO2 is up there for so long, the other greenhouse gases become insignificant. Okay? Lifetimes. Okay? Methane resides in the atmosphere 12 years. Nitrous oxide, 114 years. CFCs, 45. Carbon dioxide, C section 612. Let's take a look at this highly accurate estimate. Okay? If I came to you and say, this is the IPCC. Okay? They're scaring everyone to death. Don't you think they have a pretty accurate measurement of the residency life? Well, they claim it's between 50 and 200 years. That's a pretty doggone big difference, right? Hey, if I plug something in with a factor of 200 versus 50, or even 50 is a pretty doggone big number, okay, it's going to magnify its impact, okay, versus the other ones. Water vapor, once again, you don't find water vapor on any of these charts. They just kind of overlook it. Okay? Here's another example. They say CO2 resides 100 plus years. So they're all making claims that CO2, when it's produced up there, it stays there, right? That's their argument. The IPCC tells you that. Once again, here it is, and they say a residency life of 5 to 200 years. So even in the IPCC's own chart, you can find that they have 2 different charts. However, now it's down to 5. So I'm looking at this thinking, what is it? You know, that's what the normal scientists would do. You wouldn't think they'd ever publish something and say, well, it could be 5, it could be 200. Because that's a tremendously important part of their model. So I did a little research. I thought, okay, this is a simple turnover problem. Basic finance, this is an inventory problem. This is an annual cycle of CO2. It swings by about 20 parts per million. Trees breathe it in during the summer and exhale it during the winters. Okay? Summer's winter, summer's winter. 20-point swings. 20 points, basically 5% of atmospheric CO2 is put in and pulled out each year. 5% into 100% is what? 20 years. You know from starting from their own data that you've got a maximum lifetime of 20 years before you turn over 100%. Actually, 18.75 during their own years. So there's no way for it to be 200 years, unless this chart's wrong, and this is the chart that you'll find everywhere ever produced. There's another way to take a look at it. I said, okay, well, that's one way. Okay, that gives me a maximum year of 20 years. Well, back in the early 60s, we did a lot of nuclear testing inside of our atmosphere. And that produced a lot of what was called carbon-14. It's also produced naturally. But the key is you can clearly see carbon-14 reach a spike of around 200 back in about 1960. Mother Nature was able to remove almost all of it back down to its normal level, which is right here, between about 60 and 90 within 30 years. So there's and because remember also you're producing carbon-14 as you go along, so it's kind of like swimming upstream. But even that puts it at a maximum of 30 years. Okay? Most studies I read put the actual life of carbon around 5 to 7 years. That's a huge difference from 200 years. 200 years, and you can see why if you use 5 versus 200, your models are going to be way off. Okay? This part of the presentation I call, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Every time I'd read this research, I'd sit there and say, okay, it looks like it's pointing this way, but the conclusion would be man-made CO2. I could never figure out how they could go from here to here. I'm going to show you why. Okay? This is the IPCC report, right? And if I was going to sit there and do a study on global warming, I'd sit there and I'd say, okay, what are the most significant factors that would cause global warming? I'd probably think one, the sun would be probably the most studied. Then we'd probably look at water vapor. The last thing I'd be thinking of is a greenhouse, a trace gas, right? Well, this is the IPCC. This is what they very low. This is the importance of what they study. This is very high understanding. This is very low understanding. What do they know the least about? The sun. What do they know the most about? CO2. So clearly, what they've done is they just simply put all their efforts towards finding reasons for CO2. Okay? Anyone see water vapor up there at all? It's not. They don't even include water vapor. Okay? A good example of this is if I looked hard enough, I could prove that exercise causes obesity. And the way I could do that is simply say, here's a chart showing obesity rate in the U.S. going higher. Here's the sales of Nike's going higher. I can make a claim that if I looked hard enough, I could find data to prove that exercise causes obesity. It doesn't make any sense, but that's essentially what they've done by focusing on CO2. What I'm covering now is these are actual claims made by Lonnie Thompson. Okay? I went to see one of his presentations down at OSU, and he makes a certain set of claims. And I'm going to cover those claims, give you the data, and then you decide, does the conclusion he reached, is it supported by what he claims? Paul, we're going to run out of time. Should I stop or keep going? Okay.
Until 9:30, right?
Okay.
We'll wrap it up, and then what we'll do is we'll go in a circle because I really want to get people's intense feedback.
Okay. We're getting a lot of that into question and answer right now. Well, this is okay. This is Dr. Thompson. This is the gentleman that's in Al Gore's movie, and this is his data and his research. Okay. He gets this thing: why the contrarians are wrong, balance of the evidence. I scratch out and why the contrarians are right, the weight of the evidence. Okay? The first thing he says is the stratosphere cools as the surface warms. Okay? Variation of the sun's output would instead cause similar trends in the atmosphere layer instead of opposite ones. What he's saying is that the stratosphere, you've got the troposphere, which is lower atmosphere, and then the stratosphere, which is right above that. The stratosphere is cooling, and he's claiming that the cooling of the stratosphere is due to CO2, or man-made growth. Because what happens is, you trap the heat down here, it doesn't get up to warm the stratosphere. Logical theory, right? And he shows you this chart. Sure enough, the stratosphere is cooling. I'm thinking, well, Dr. Thompson, you're right. Got me there. And he shows you a chart. Actually, this is the chart that backs it up. This is not Dr. Thompson's chart. I got this off the internet. Okay, and they'll show you that this is the stratosphere. These are cooling areas. And it's even labeled CO2 and ozone. And I'm thinking, how could I be so wrong? Right? Well, here it is. This is the chart. And once again, you can go get this thing, go look this chart up with yourself. And you'll see this is the altitude. This is the altitude. This is the wavelength. And sure enough, this gray area is warming. Sure enough, you can show that the heat is being trapped in the lower atmosphere, causing cooling in the stratosphere. When I saw this, I thought, game over. I am really wrong. There's something to this CO2 stuff. How could you deny that? But the problem is, they forgot that they give an IR spectrum down here. They labeled it CO2, but if you drop this perpendicular, it lines up at 6.5 microns. CO2 absorbs at 2.7, 4.3, and 15. Nowhere near 6.5. So they mislabeled it. They did, however, label ozone correctly, because that's 10 microns. It's exactly down here at 10 microns. This, 6.5, is peak absorption of water vapor. So they mislabeled it. So water vapor is causing the cooling of the stratosphere, not CO2, according to their own data. Okay? So far we have Lonnie 0, carbon dioxide 0, water vapor 1, sun 0. Okay? Temperatures have warmed more at night than during the day. And he says, that's proof of man-made global warming. Okay? And he'll show you a temperature. Sure enough, temperatures are warming at night. Well, lo and behold, because it is well known that compared to non-urban areas, urban heat islands raise nighttime temperatures more than daytime temperatures. It's called the urban island effect. Has nothing to do with man-made global warming. Okay? This is what it is. You heat the buildings, it's like warming up a hot potato when it takes longer to cool off in the nighttime than a tree would. So you get these heat islands around cities. That's what's going on. That's why the nighttimes are warmer than the daytime.
The heat around cities is from...
You trap more heat in urban areas because you've got more concrete. It's like heating up a baked potato versus heating up a tree.
The sun absorption into the concrete.
Yeah, and it just takes longer to release at night, so it's relatively warmer at night than it used to be.
Oh, because of all the concrete in the city.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lo and behold, that's explained by what? The sun and the heat island effect, not CO2. Okay? Once again, we've got Lonnie 0, carbon dioxide 0, water vapor 1, sun 1. Okay? Temperatures have risen more in winter than in summertime. This is one that made my jaw drop when I heard him make this claim. Does anyone see a real problem with this theory right off the bat? He's claiming that because we're warming more in the wintertime than we do in the summertime, it rules out the sun. Does anyone see a problem with that right off the bat? And by the way, this was given to the mechanical engineers at Ohio State. These are a group of pretty bright people. Nobody caught this one right off the bat.
So he's saying it's...
Temperatures have risen more in the wintertime than in the summertime. The opposite of what would be expected if it was the sun driving it. See a problem with that?
Well, isn't the angle of the sun...
We're the closest to the sun in the wintertime, okay? I guarantee you, if you go home and turn on a burner, and as you bring your hand close to that burner, it's going to get hot, right? That's second grade science. You're closest to the sun. If the sun's hotter, you'd expect to be getting hotter in the wintertime than in the summertime. Has nothing to do with atmospheric CO2, okay? So once again, we get the sun 2, water vapor 1. We've got the CO2 0.
The difference between winter and summer is the angle of the rays that...
Yeah, but we're actually closer to the sun.
Actually closer to the northern hemisphere.
The northern hemisphere, yes.
It's closer to the sun. I mean, the whole planet's closer to the sun, even though the northern hemisphere is having winter.
Yes.
So why is winter cold?
Why is winter cold? Because of the angle.
Because the what?
The
Angle is greater, but the planet is closer.
The planet's closer, but the angle the rays hit it is more oblique. This is another one. I got George on here. He's really confused when we reach this conclusion. Okay? High latitudes have warmed more than low latitudes. Northern hemisphere is warming more than the southern hemisphere. Once again, I say it's not global warming, it's northern hemisphere warming. But Dr. Thompson will point out that the northern hemisphere is warming more than the southern hemisphere. Okay? This is what really blew my mind. Since more radiation is received in low latitudes, one would expect the opposite of the sun's driving effect. What is the whole global warming theory? Greenhouse gases are trapping the radiation. If you've got more radiation, as he points out, in the southern hemisphere, wouldn't you expect warming in the southern hemisphere, not the northern hemisphere? That's the whole theory. And he basically says right there, it's a bunch of bunk without saying that. He just accidentally says this. But the northern hemisphere is warming, but most of the sun hits the southern hemisphere. Okay? And sure enough, that's what's going on. And this is a chart he uses. And this was another thing that just made my jaw drop. This is the temperature. You can see you're getting real hot up here, and you're getting cool down here. These blue areas are cool. Okay? So you got northern hemisphere warming, southern hemisphere cooling. But did he show a chart down here with high levels of CO2 in the northern hemisphere and low levels of CO2 in the southern hemisphere? What does he show to compare it? Precipitation. He says water vapor's higher in that northern hemisphere. That's where the temperature charts are. Right? He's making an argument for water vapor with his own chart, but he claims CO2. That's his chart. That's not mine. And you can go look it up yourself.
Wouldn't you also have more fossil fuels being used in northern areas?
Sure. Once again, well, yes, but CO2 is evenly distributed around the globe. You do not find it, you find 380 parts per million in both northern and southern hemisphere. CO2 is evenly dispersed. Even if you're producing it more of it up here, it evenly disperses around the globe. Okay? And it points out widespread significant increases in water vapor in the northern hemisphere. Okay? There is no comparable systematic change in precipitation detected in the lower latitudes. Okay? Once again, you've got the warming associated with the water vapor.
But if it's the sun that's heating up the planet, why wouldn't that affect the southern hemisphere?
Right here, water vapor. You got the water vapor trapping it up here.
And she's saying, why isn't the southern hemisphere getting warmer?
Because it's drier.
Oh.
You don't have the water vapor trapping it down there.
But
Okay.
I thought you said that according to the temperature in Albany, it's not getting warm.
It's not. I'm just saying this is the data that they provide.
Oh, according to what they said.
Yeah, I'm taking their own data to debunk their own theories.
But according to Albany,
Yeah.
temperature, it's not warming.
According to Albany, it's not.
But according to their data, you're finding problems.
According to this data, which I believe came from Walther et al. 2002 Nature, it's warming. Well, that's what I'm saying. You can find a temperature chart to make any argument you want. That's why I'm saying part of it's bad science, just because you shouldn't be able to say according to what chart. But according to this data, according to the chart that they use, it doesn't make their own case. That's the main point.
So you're just showing bad science.
I'm just showing bad science. Yeah.
You're not saying whether it's, I mean, well, tell me, is the globe warming or not? What do you think?
I would say the globe is warming, and it's due to the sun.
But so then Albany's wrong.
Well, Albany's a spot. You say Albany, I mean, climate's worldwide, whereas Albany could, I mean, there could be cooling and warm periods due to various building. There may be more trees, or there's a bunch of things that could cause local changes in climate. Okay? Overall, though, I'd argue probably it's increasing because the sun's been getting warmer. Okay? Once again, now we're down to water vapor 2, sun 2. There's a parallel warming trend over the land and the oceans. Okay? Sure enough, but once again, that's consistent with the sun because it's going to fall on both land and the oceans. Okay, virtually 100%. And once again, the oceans are being heated by the sun, not the atmosphere. So now we're up to water vapor 3, sun 2. Okay, because once again, if the oceans are warming, you have to explain why are the oceans warming. Okay, several dozen top models have become progressively better at replicating climate patterns, and they claim that what you need to do is you need to throw in man-made greenhouse gases to make them work. Okay? Well, if their models aren't including water vapor, and if they don't sign a greenhouse global warming potential, I don't care what their models say. And by the way, several dozen may be getting better. What about the other several dozen that aren't? And I did see someone at OSU that points out that their models aren't very good. Okay? And I think this guy, Dr. Gerald Stokes, this is what really blew my mind about this theory. Is this guy, he comes and he talks at Ohio State, and he's responsible for building these giant models. He works over at the laboratory at Battelle Memorial, and he comes in, and he's real excited about telling everyone about these models. And he points out that they go and they spend about $250 million to create these models explaining climate. And they're based it on CO2. And he says, you know what? Well, after we got finished spending that $250 million, you know what we found? They don't do a good job. So what does a normal scientist do after they spend $250 million and they're getting bad results? What do you normally do? You probably think you're barking up the wrong tree. Probably because you're forgetting water vapor in the sun and you're building on CO2. What did he do? He bragged about spending another $500 million to improve the model. Okay? They just spend more money. They're going to prove CO2 does it one way or another and doesn't care how much. I mean, if you got that kind of a deep pocket, they should be able to prove CO2 is going to cause it. And he's going to try it. I watched the guy say it himself. I asked him about, don't they include water vapor in Henry's Law? And this is why I got this pucker factor over here. The guy just stopped dead in his tracks. I pointed out to him that, you know, according to Henry's Law, that's a natural phenomenon. You put that in the guy goes, the oceans are warming? And then a representative from the Bird Polar Research Center, and I was referring to her chart. I go up to her and I said, by the way, I was referring to your chart. Why didn't you back me up there? She just remained silent. She just let the conversation go on, no debate. We've all seen Dr. Thompson with his Kilimanjaro photos, right? Kilimanjaro is melting due to global warming. Anyone disagree with that? Has anyone seen Inconvenient Truth? Does anyone disagree with that? Kilimanjaro is melting away, right?
It started long before even Hemingway was around.
All right. We're going to get to there. You guys aren't allowed to answer questions anymore. Okay? This is Dr. Thompson. He gets up there and he shows you this piece of glacier. And he'll show you that these glaciers are disappearing, implying what? Global warming. Right? They're melting away. Take a real close look. What's he standing in?
Mud.
Dust. This is as dry as a bone, right? These glaciers aren't melting. They're evaporating. Actually, it's called sublimation. It's going from solid to a gas. But essentially, it's like freeze drying. Okay? It's dry as a desert up there. In fact, his own chart that he shows you shows that that area is cooling. So this glacier is disappearing in an area that's cooling. It's drier though. Okay? Kilimanjaro's May last week come back. The research teams found no evidence showing the lower precipitation and not rising temperatures on the summit. So what they say is the research shows lower precipitation, not temperatures, is the reason they're disappearing. But Dr. Thompson and Al Gore doesn't tell you that in the movie. They make it clear that CO2 caused global warming. The research is totally contrary to that. The science will not be settled by declaration. All right? They're out there saying this is settled science. Well, let's take a look. Okay? Well, here's one thing. Hurricane forecaster, oceans, not CO2, causes global warming. Here's someone that's disagreeing. We just saw yesterday the Senate produced all these global warming scientists are jumping ship and saying this is not holding water. Here's one person. The oceans are. And I've pointed a lot of evidence points towards the ocean. Okay? Danish scientists, global warming is a myth. Okay? Doesn't look like it's settled science here. Okay? Global warming, the debate is irrational. Completely irrational, this portion points out. Okay? Science, warming is not caused by humans. Climate change hits Mars, as I've shown you. Okay? It's solar system warming. Okay? This is the one I like. Trees cause global warming. This was just produced in the National Academy of the Sciences. Okay? Trees cause it. Why? Because they produce water. They use a different argument than what I used in the presentation. Trees produce a lot of water vapor. That's where all the water vapor is coming from in the northern hemisphere. It's trapping the heat. But that's National Academy of Science, not me. Trees cause global warming. Here's your tree growth. This is the changes in world's growth stock. A lot of green in the northern hemisphere. A lot of red down here, dry down here, wet up here, heat up here, cooling down here. That's a pretty good correlation. CO2 is evenly divided.
So the red part was all the deforestation.
Yes, that's what you're talking about. Okay? Here's another chart of it. This comes from nature. A lot of green in the northern hemisphere, relatively red in the southern hemisphere. Where you follow the water vapor, you follow the heat. Same thing. Danger, conformity. They agree with us or else. Now, I just throw this part in because the thing that I found interesting when I go to these events, some things kind of disturb me because I go to a lot of these events down at Ohio State and I listen to what they say and the arguments they make. Okay? And I see a lot of problems developing. Humans blamed for climate change. And I encourage everyone to go to some of these events and listen to them when they start to talk about not global warming, but what they plan to do. Okay? Because when they start blaming man, they're going to want to do something about it. Okay? Children are bad for planning. Okay? That gets me real worried when I see something like that. Okay? Eco-extremists want the world population to drop below 1 billion. Okay? That's Paul Ehrlich, population bomb type stuff. Okay? That's eugenics type stuff that we saw at the beginning of the last century. Okay? This is what really bothers me. China is using global warming as an excuse for their one-child policy. Infanticide is being justified in China to prevent global warming. Okay? We all know this. Who wants to use one square toilet paper when we go to the restroom? Okay? Our speed limit is 20 miles per hour. Okay? And they want to tax our cows, for God's sakes. They're producing too much methane. They're also silencing people like me. Okay? There's a whole bunch of this blacklisting going on. You can go to the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have what I call the blacklist. They list all the scientists that are disagreeing with it. That's almost like it's like they did on Hollywood.
There's plenty of other reasons to need to keep the population down besides global warming. I mean, with just one species just overrunning the planet creates a lot of other problems.
I wouldn't agree. I'm not a big fan of population.
You're looking at famines and
Science is not a
This is another one. How they're silencing this weatherman up in Delaware. Okay, if you look back in the Little Ice Age, when they had global cooling weather back then, they started blaming people. Part of the reason why they had all the witch hunts and the burnings of witches is because they blamed them for the weather changes back then.
There was hail 1 foot big,
Oh yeah.
1 foot long, so it was very scary. And they blamed witches
Sure.
for burning them at the stake.
Yeah, it's called weather cooking. There's a Michael Crichton is doing presentations now. When he gets an astrophysicist from Harvard, goes back and reviews the history. And sure enough, back then, there was a bunch of climate fears, and they burned people for it.
Well, no one would suggest that's a good idea, but there are things like birth control. I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
I'm just saying, like Paul Ehrlichman wrote back in the population bomb, we were all supposed to be starving by 1980. We're producing so much food now, we're burning it as ethanol. Okay? Their claims are never come true.
Actually, the rate of
Here's the other thing, though. Here's the other thing is when you take a look at what's it going to cost to abide by Kyoto, they're talking huge dollars, 3 to 5% of GDP, $300 to $800 billion a year. Okay? We're also suing car manufacturers. We can lose a lot of jobs. Okay? And if you slow down the U.S., you slow down the developing world, and they really pay a heavy price for it.
well, we have to stop using fossil fuels, though, for other reasons. One thing, we're running out of oil.
Sure. I'm not arguing for it. I'm not disagreeing. My point is, if we're going to spend 3 to 5% of our GDP on a speculation, we know for certain we've got a Social Security time bomb. Okay, we've got a 400,000, according to the Heritage Foundation, the fiscal wake-up. Our generations have left the new generation a $400,000 liability per household. If we're going to go spend money, let's spend it on our children so that they don't have to pay that $400,000 bill. We can provide a better education, better health care, better defense.
Well, there's lots of stuff. I mean, if we cut spending with the Pentagon, that's way out of control, but that's a whole other issue.
And lastly, don't forget the brief history. These same scientists that were telling you of the coming ice age, back when I was a kid, scared me to death, they told you of the coming ice age back then. They're just fooling the world. Now they're telling you global warming. Worst of all, had we rushed to judgment back then and done what they told us to do, we would have melted the polar ice caps. But black stood on it and melted. So those polar bears they're claiming are going to die because things are getting warmer for them, so they have less time to hibernate and more time to eat. Okay? We would have killed them by now if we had rushed to judgment. Okay? So I'm just arguing for cooler heads, look into the science, and make your own judgments. Okay? We're burning, like I said. The UN, we made this rush to judgment about burning food to drive our cars with. The UN is saying not so fast. Ethanol is causing serious problems.
Yes, it is.
So we rush into problems. We drain, plow, plant, herbicide, fertilize. We cut down forests, drain wetlands to produce corn so that we can burn it instead of feeding people. We drive up the price of corn.
Well, ethanol is a terrible idea for fuel.
Sure.
And actually, Richard Perez in 1988, or 1998 rather, actually spoke out against ethanol. He actually is one of the utmost leading scientists in solar energy technology. And he said back then that if you use ethanol, you're only going to increase the global warming situation with the...
It's not a solution.
Well, I'd love to come back and do my presentation on ethanol. It does a good job there. And lastly, what you say is, typically if someone doesn't have a good argument, they're not going to sit there and offer you money to debate. Well, that's what they're doing now. Because they're baiting Al Gore. They've got a skeptic here. If you ever read his research, a lot of my stuff comes from him. He does an awful lot of good work. They're out there literally paying Al Gore just to discuss this in an open forum like this. Okay? He's not going to be so bold if he doesn't have a good argument. I wouldn't get in front of you and debate this kind of stuff if I didn't think I could defend it with the facts. Okay? And that's what I find kind of interesting is the skeptics out there, they're very bold, and they're always referring to the science. Okay? Al Gore is good at monologue. You won't see him doing what I'm doing in a debate and giving you the data to take a look at yourself. Okay? Al Gore will tell you what to think. I'll give you the tools to help you think.
Well, Al Gore is just a voice. I mean, this whole issue was around long before him. So, I mean, I'm not in love with Al Gore or anything. It's just, he's way too conservative for me.
There we go. Get that on tape.
Yeah, he is. I mean...
Well, I mean, he's not the one who first brought it up. In 1969, you had the Doomsday Report, which actually a lot of the numbers have fit exactly where, what they predicted.
Are you referring to Paul Ehrlich's population bomb?
Columbia University.